Itamar Marcus. Mr. Marcus, welcome back to the Lisa Wexler Show. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks for inviting me, Lisa.
Sure. So what I want to ask you is, tell me in the context of all the translation you're doing lately, especially as it, pertains to Tunisia, Egypt, what's going on. Is there any difference and what's happening on the streets between what the Arab leaders are telling their people and talking among themselves versus what we are reading in the Western press in English?
Well, I think the critical thing to understand is that the popular movement in Egypt, for example, which is perceived as a movement for democracy, is in fact a movement for the democratic electoral system, but it is not necessarily a move toward the values of democracy that we hold dear, for example, human rights. So the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, in Egypt, is an organization that's very powerful, that has a lot of support, and the Muslim Brotherhood does not really believe in human rights and those values as we believe in them. The Muslim Brotherhood, for example, in a book that was written by the former head of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was entitled Jihad is the Way, he writes things like, know that jihad is for the purpose of realizing the great task of establishing an Islamic state and strengthening the religion and spreading it around the world. Also in that book he writes, know that your status and firmly believe that you are masters of the world. There is a very strong Islamist tendency within Egypt that, on the one hand, is in favor of democracy, but it's not in favor of democracy for human rights. It's in favor of democracy in order to elect this kind of an Islamic force, which will then be something similar possibly to an Iran in the Middle East.
Mr. Marcus, I have something here that says that Mohammed Badi is the current Brotherhood Supreme Leader. Is that true?
The current leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, I can't give you the exact name, but the previous one who wrote this book, which is called Jihad is the Way, is an official Muslim Brotherhood book. That's what I was quoting from.
Because I read something here that someone named Mohammed Badi, 2010, is quoted by saying, we will continue to raise the banner of jihad against the Jews, our first and foremost enemies. Resistance is the only solution against the Zio-American arrogance and tyranny. All we need is for the Arab and Muslim peoples to stand behind it and support it. We say to our brothers, the Mujahideen in Gaza, be patient, persist in your jihad, know that Allah is with you. And it goes on and on and on. And it goes on to say, basically, we pray Allah to take this oppressive Jewish Zionist band of people. Do not spare a single one of them. Count their numbers and kill them down to the very last one, says their current spiritual head, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, in 2009.
Yes. And what's particularly dangerous about this is the Muslim Brotherhood is somehow perceived as a fringe group. I just want to let
Yes,
you know,
I have heard that. I've heard they don't represent most of the people. That's not true?
Let me tell you some polls that were recently done, and I say recently, November 2010, done by Pew, based in Washington, and the polls found that over 70% of Egyptians want Sharia Islamic law. 77%.
Are you kidding?
Wait, it gets worse. 77% are in favor of hand amputations for theft, and it still gets worse. 84% of Egyptians are in favor of capital punishment for someone who leaves Islam and converts to another religion. So the Egyptian population is very, very radical in Islamic interpretation and its ideology. These are polls that were done by a very respectable Washington Institute. They're very current, and we're talking about a very radical Islamic Egyptian population. The Muslim Brotherhood will be a natural ally for them and a natural political force for them.
Why is it that Mubarak was able for 30 years to tamp down these forces?
He did it through ruthless oppression. He did it in the days, he based his power in the days before internet and tweets and people having the ability to really communicate. People didn't have the ability to organize. And I think it was all this modern technology which enabled the people to realize that that the vast majority doesn't want the corruption of Mubarak, doesn't want the oppression of Mubarak. So, like I say, this was a revolution against the oppression of one particular leader. It was not a revolution in favor of human rights.
Okay, so going with that, that's a pretty scary thing, because we can assume if that's the case in Egypt, it is most likely the case in Tunisia, in Bahrain, in throughout, in Libya, throughout the Arab world. Where has this, and I know that we've talked about this a little bit, and I heard your speech about how much worse this anti-American, anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish hatred has gotten in the last 30, 40 years. Where has this been? Why has this flourished so? And is there anything that Americans or anybody can do to go, against it, to try and brainwash people in the other direction in favor of human rights and against all these bigoted hatreds that turn into violence?
Well, there are a couple of problems here. One of them is that a lot of these laws and these religious practices that we in the West are appalled by, for example, the amputation of hands for theft, these are things that appear in Islamic law. And there's a concept in Islamic law which says that there can be nothing new. Everything that Muhammad said and did is perfect and can never change. As opposed to other religions, certainly Christianity has gone through evolution, Judaism has gone through many reformations. In fact, it's embodied in the nature of Judaism to evolve continuously. Islam teaches that there can be no change, and everything that Muhammad said is perfect and forever. So if he dictated, or he wrote that, and he is taught that hands should be amputated for theft, then a Muslim feels like they're betraying their religion if they turn against these. So that's one of the real reasons why we have such a serious problem with the Muslim world, is that anyone who comes along and talks about evolving toward a more modern interpretation is immediately accused of blasphemy. And therefore, we have very, very little religious evolution in the Islamic world. And for that reason, all of these old interpretations are things that are still in place. In addition, if you talk about hatred of Jews in the West and hatred of Jews and Christians, there are plenty of sources in Islamic literature that express tremendous hatred toward Jews, hatred and loathing toward Christians as well. These aren't the only sources, but these sources are being quoted today by the leaders, and those are the sources that people are hearing. In part, they were quoted because these leaders were corrupt, and when people are corrupt, they have to present other targets of the enmity to their people. So don't hate us, hate the Jews. Don't hate us, hate the Americans. Don't hate us, hate the West. You're suffering because of imperialism. You're not suffering because of us. So it was easy to target the Christian countries, the Jewish countries, including through the use of Islamic sources. Today we have a terrible mess. We've got all these Muslim countries with vast percentages of the population with a tremendous loathing for Jews and Christians, and they believe that this is what their religion is demanding of them.
And you don't see any countervailing forces based. You are Palestinian Media Watch. I'm chatting with Itamar Marcus, who does translations all the time for the world now, for world leaders, in order to translate into other languages that which Arab leaders are saying in Arabic to their own people. You don't see leaders that are gathering steam in terms of leading people to a better place, a more moderate place, a place, for example, taking Jews and Americans out of it. Let's talk about women. Let's talk about modernity with women. Is there any movement towards that? There have been a lot of Arab countries in the past that have been more liberal when it comes to women than Iran, for example.
Well, we publicized at Palestinian Media Watch, and this video can be seen on our website. We just publicized a few weeks ago that the Arab world was producing a television program that was going to 50 Arab stations in the Arab world. And the stations, the purpose of this particular program was to empower women. And we publicized that the video that they produced, that was a filler, that was part of this empowerment of women, was called The Ideal Woman, and it pictured 7 or 8 different women. 3 of them were involved in either martyrdom or terrorism. One of these ideal women who was being presented was a Palestinian woman terrorist named Dalal Moghrabi, who was involved in the hijacking and killing of 37 Israeli civilians on a bus. And this was outrageous.
And this is who they are being propped up to admire.
Exactly. This is being presented as the ideal woman, and this was, by the way, funded, or at least their website said it was in partnership with the United Nations.
All right, Itamar Marcus, co-founder of Palestinian Media Watch, PalestinianMediaWatch.org. Is that right, Mr. Marcus?
It's palwatch.org.
Palwatch.org, where you can see videos and transcripts and documentation yourself, if you are so inclined, in order to basically see for yourself very often the difference between what leaders in the Arab world are saying to their own people and how that looks in English. And it's very, very troubling to me. You know, Mr. Marcus, yesterday we had on Rabbi Cooper from the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which is all about tolerance. And he, too, had the same message, but he took it a little bit differently politically. Now, of course, he's speaking as an American. He is basically saying with the tremendous amount of anti-everything, anti-American, anti-women, anti-Semitism, there needs to be a quid pro quo of American political policy to give aid in return for spreading a different kind of education and insisting that some of this language be omitted from the public discourse. What do you think about that?
Well, we agree completely at Palestinian Media Watch, and we have been giving that identical message in parliaments around the world. We've given that message in Congress, in events that we've had in Congress, and press conferences that we've had in Congress, in Foreign Affairs Committee of Congress last year. If the Western governments, if the European governments and the United States continue to fund Palestinian Authority, for example, without demanding peace education, allowing the Palestinian Authority to continue to promote hatred, violence, demonization of Jews and the United States, then every penny is wasted. Even worse than wasted, every penny is being a facilitator of the hatred, of the violence, and it's American and Western money that's going to, in a sense, guarantee that Israel and the Palestinians continue to have warfare. If they would demand of the Palestinians that they have peace education, they teach their people that Israel has a right to exist, that Jews have a history in the land, it could turn the world, it could turn the Middle East around. 60%, according to recent reports, 60% of Palestinian Authority budget comes from outside contributions, and that's mostly the United States and the Western European countries. If these countries would use that 60% as leverage to demand, one, the cessation of hatred, and two, the promotion of positive peace messaging, it could be revolutionary in terms of what's happening in the Palestinian Authority.
Mr. Marcus, this is my last question for you, and I know we don't have much time, but do you think that it's a coincidence, an accident, or more purposeful than that, that it is during the presidency of Barack Hussein Obama that these changes are occurring? Do you think Cairo had anything to do with it? Do you think the fact that the Muslim world views him as a Muslim because he has a Muslim father, had a Muslim father, do you think that this is just, basically surreptitious, or not surreptitious, serendipitous, or do you think that it's because they saw an opening, because they saw an American president who would be more sympathetic to the Muslim world?
I think the atmosphere that was created by President Obama in traveling to the Middle East possibly created a sense of empowerment to the masses, and I don't think it was him directly, more than I sense that it was the feeling that the United States wouldn't stand by Mubarak, wouldn't stand by these other leaders. If there were a president of the United States who would have given Egypt complete and unquestioned support, that is Mubarak, I'm not saying it would have been right or wrong, then I think Mubarak would have had a lot more confidence in putting down the uprising. But the United States didn't give that support. Mubarak realized he was alone. The people realized he was alone, and that just accelerated the masses. Again, unfortunately, what the United States hopes to have as a result of democracy is not what the Egyptian people hope to have as a result of democracy. The United States hopes democracy to lead to human rights. The Egyptian people hope democracy would lead to a much more Islamic Egypt.
So similar to Hamas, when they won the right to vote in Gaza, they got Hamas, and the people said, American people said, oh my God, what did we let happen? And what we let happen was the expression of what they wanted to happen.
Exactly, and I fear the same thing is going to happen in Egypt.
Thank you, Itamar Marcus of Palestinian, palwatch.org or palwatch.com?
palwatch.org, Palestinian Media Watch, yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Marcus, for being on the show with us. You're listening to The Lisa Wexler Show.